Hey everyone, Brian Beeler here with the Storage View podcast, and we've got a Midwesterner on today, Jeff Reddy, who's CEO of Scale Computing. Jeff, thanks for coming in.
Hey, thanks for having me.
All the way from Indianapolis, I understand.
That's right. That's right. Born and raised a Hoosier, so I'm
Wow.
here where all the big tech companies are.
Yeah, well, that's what they say to us. Like, why are you in Cincinnati's Storage View? And I said, it's the storage central point of the
Yeah,
Midwest.
right.
I mean, everybody knows
Exactly.
that. You could
That's
have
right.
Boston or Austin or Denver or whatever Bay Area. I think we're coalescing some energy in the Midwest between the two of us.
That's right. That's right. I agree. So yeah, we've been here since the very beginning. So we're about 14 years into the business now, and we're making it work.
All right, I want to hear all about scale computing, but before that, you got to talk to me about the brewery you're involved in. What's up with that, and how'd you get into, not how'd you get into beer, because beer is fantastic, but how did you get into the brewery business?
Yeah. So I own a brewery here in Indianapolis called Centerpoint Brewing Company. Only distributed throughout Indiana right now, but we're working on doing more. But in my spare time from running my own startups, I help a lot of other people with their startups. I'm just a glutton for punishment that way. And I had a couple of young guys approach me about 6, 7 years ago now, trying to do a business plan around starting a brewery. And I myself was a big beer fan and a home brewer. And what they didn't know is before I started Scale Computing, I had written a business plan to start a brewery and
Oh, yeah.
decided I better do tech. So I stuck with the tech, but then I had a soft spot for these guys and have been involved ever since. So.
Well, I mean, the waves of micro brews, breweries, I suppose, and how that's gone sort of, there was that initial wave, but really the one where you guys jumped in 6, 7 years ago was a great time to get serious about it from a business standpoint. I mean, down in Cincinnati, we've got all sorts of small breweries and now little ones like Ryan Guys that have gotten really quite robust, but the timing for them was about perfect, right?
Yeah, no, I mean it's been good. Obviously, the COVID brought some challenges in that industry for sure. But it's funny. I've been doing startups for 30 years, and almost all of my direct experience is in tech. But starting a business is not wholly undifferent from one industry to the next. I mean, instead of tech support, we have bartenders. Instead of engineers, we have brewers. We still have sales guys. You still have marketing. Stuff goes wrong. I mean, it's all kind of the same.
Well, wait, what's the tech equivalent of a bar fight?
I don't know. System crash. I don't know. Data
Yeah,
down scenario. Yeah.
some bad PR maybe.
Yeah.
All right, and so I'll just one more. Do you have an IPA in your roster? A nice West Coast style. Don't bring me all that hazy stuff.
No, I mean, we'll have, 10, 12 beers on tap at any time. Our best selling beer by far though is actually a blood orange IPA. So it's a
Okay.
traditional IPA, fairly low alcohol. It's almost session style, so you can have more than a few. Delicious. That's our top seller. So.
All right. Well, you're only 2 hours away, and I've been known to travel longer than that for good beer. So maybe I'll
It's
come up
worth
and
it.
see you
It's
sometime.
totally worth it. Yeah.
All right. So perhaps we'll get back to the point of the podcast is less beer talk and more tech talk. Um, we've known you guys for a long time. I've worked with your marketing team for, gosh, probably 6, 7 years now. We've done several projects with you. But for those that don't know, give us the brief hit on who is Scale Computing.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm the founder of Scale. So, when Scale started 14 years ago, I was in my basement, and I've been at it ever since. Scale is really all about simplifying IT infrastructure. Our flagship product is, generally bucketed as hyperconvergence. I know you guys refer to it that way, hence, but hyperconvergence is a storage technology, as you well know, right? And that's certainly a part of the solution, but ultimately it's about running applications, right? And having a platform that's easy to run applications. Some people have said we've been doing edge computing since before it was cool. When I started the company, I had a vision in my head to use effectively machine intelligence to detect and correct the problems that commonly happen in IT infrastructure, right? It's pattern recognition. And, we know in IT, you have an IT person and, when somebody, a user calls into help desk or opens a ticket and they say, something's wrong with the database is running slow. Well, yeah, you well know, we all know listening to this podcast, it might be the database, it might be the network, it's probably the network, right? It might be the server, it might be anything, right? And so what happens is IT, it's like going to the doctor and saying my knee hurts and demanding the solution, right? Well, maybe you need aspirin or maybe you need orthoscopic surgery. Like you don't know, it's a symptom, right? And so that's what IT does. I mean, a lot of their time, right, is spent diagnosing these kinds of problems. And, we learned that if you were monitoring an entire system, not just any piece in isolation, but, the storage, the network, the applications, et cetera, right, you can effectively see what's going on, just like an IT person would, right? I mean, so how much, here's the weird thing that happens in IT, right? You say how much free space is on the drive in server number 2. And sometimes that answer comes back and it's, 5 gig, right? And that's fine, right? And sometimes the answer comes back and it's like less than 1 meg, and that's really bad, right? We all know. And sometimes the answer comes back and it's like negative E, right? And you're like, what the hell am I supposed to do with that, right? But that's IT, right? You get bogus data, and so we saw, well, if you could like filter out the bad data and filter out, sometimes it doesn't respond, right, and see what's going on holistically with the system, you could detect many problems in IT, right, and take corrective action. And so the whole idea of Scale was to use that technology to provide a system which would effectively heal itself as best it could. I mean, it can't always, right? But as best it could, all in the name of keeping the applications up and running. And the inspiration for this came back to many, many years ago when I was a very young lad. My dad was what we would now call an IT guy. It was called information systems back then, but he was an IT guy, right?
I thought for sure you were going to say a brewmaster and tie this back to beer.
Yeah.
But
No, work on that. My dad only started drinking beer after I owned a brewery, so we brought him around. But he was managing mainframes, and I would go into the office with him on the weekend because that's when stuff breaks because it's IT, right? And I'd see the mainframes, I'd play with the punch card machine, I'd do all these kinds of things. But as I saw that world evolve over years, I remember him talking about two things, right? One is he had a tremendous faith in IBM, right? As a company, generally, he liked the sales guys, he liked the technology, every interaction, like it was very professional, and that always stuck with me. And then the other thing was the IBM systems themselves were super resilient, and ultimately, right, those mainframes kind of evolved into the AS400s. Right, and the AS400 was known, like you could hit things with a sledgehammer and the apps would keep running, right? And so when I set out to start Scale, and I knew we could use this technology, this machine intelligence technology, to use basically off-the-shelf hardware, commodity x86 hardware, and I wanted to build a system that was as reliable as that AS400 for running applications, right? And then also build a company that my dad would think was as good as IBM. Now, I haven't asked him. I don't know if he thinks that, but that's been the goal, right? Is to be that holistic solution, and knowing that all along the way we've 14 years, right? So we've seen the rise of the cloud and everything, but not everything runs in the cloud, right? And nothing everything was ever going to run in the cloud any more than. I mean, people still use mainframes, right? I mean, there's a certain application, and that was sort of the gist of it. So Scale, it's a long-winded answer, but the backstory I think is relevant, right? Scale is a platform for running your applications, right? And it's a combination of hyper-convergence, of virtualization, of this kind of automation and self-healing, and really, meant to be super easy to manage. I mean, if there's one thing that stands out about Scale is it's that manageability from sort of day one out of the box to what happens when something goes wrong. So
we'll talk about a little bit more on the timeline of your evolution, because as you sit today, I think most really know you as an HCI company, and for better or worse, but that's kind of how you guys have been categorized, I think, in the market. 14 years ago, HCI wasn't a thing. And it wasn't really a serious thing until maybe 2 years into vSAN, or maybe a year and a half into Nutanix, where where the industry looked at that and said, okay, well, maybe it makes sense, especially at Edge or many small businesses and other spots, to mush all this together so it's easier to manage. And now we've gone on to looking at entire data centers that are software defined, and there's all sorts of other concepts. But in that 14-year to maybe 6 or 7 years ago window, when you're out there talking about some of these convergence topics, and the only thing that's being sold are giant converged infrastructure solutions from VCE back in that window,
Oh yeah. Yep.
or early FlexPod, I suppose, might be close. But like, how were you even trying to communicate what you guys were doing when the notion didn't really exist?
Yeah, it's a great question, right? I mean, when we started out, again, this foundational technology around this machine intelligence and so forth has been, I mean, that was the original tech, right? And it was designed to do this self-healing. The first product that we brought to market was, at that time, when this was all spinning disk world, right? This is a long time ago, right? All spinning disk. It was a scale out, iSCSI, SAN NAS product, right? And it was storage, just pure storage. And so, people would look at that and they'd say, well, for the first, 4 years of the company's existence, I had the stupidest name for a storage company ever conceived, right? Scale Computing, the storage company, right? Like,
Right.
why? But again, the vision was always this kind of full integrated infrastructure, right? I mean, there was no converged infrastructure, wasn't even a term then, right? It was just this idea that we could do the self-healing. And I admittedly thought, right, that, when we started out, well, we might, the storage is hard, right? And so that was where we started with the tech, and it was very useful to have this kind of self-healing storage system, right? And as things evolved, and I saw the opportunity, admittedly, maybe 10 years early, but I saw that, I saw that VMware wasn't going to be the dominant player forever, right? In terms of effectively, I'll use the term loosely, but an operating system that runs your apps, right? I mean, that's basically what it is. And I knew that would be the case. And, I saw KVM, as an open source alternative. And as that started to come on the scene, that's when I saw the opportunity to say, okay, well, now that this is open source, right, we can actually integrate that into the storage product, and have full control over it, right? That was the key, right? There's nothing wrong with VMware, but my self-healing system, like, I don't know VMware is a black box, right, to a developer on the outside. You use APIs and you get to it, but that's all you can get to. So you don't know what's going on inside. With KVM and open source, I could see everything, plug that into the system, and now we said, okay, well, we should run the apps on the same devices that are running the storage, right? And that, it's funny, you always think in hindsight, well, that seems obvious, but if you rolled the clock back 20 years, right? I mean, the reason you had specialized storage systems and effectively networking boxes and stuff is because, a single server with a CPU at that time, that CPU couldn't handle all these different things. And so you basically had a special server that did just storage, and we called them, SANs and NASs, right? Or same thing on networking. Well, what I saw, and that we're talking like 2011, maybe, kind of time frame, most storage systems, CPUs, are sitting there doing nothing. Like, they have like 98% free cycles most of the time, right? I said, well, then why buy a server, right? You can just run the apps right on this thing. And hence, this idea of hyper-convergence was born. It's a funny story, right? And it doesn't matter anymore, but, lost to the realms of storage history. When we launched our first product, which later became known as Hyper-Convergence, right? I, along with an analyst firm called Tenaja Group, we had coined the phrase hyper-converged infrastructure, and it was intended to differentiate. You'll laugh at this, right? It was intended to differentiate what we were doing at scale at this time, which was a combination of the hypervisor and converged infrastructure, hyper-converged infrastructure, right? Differentiating that from what FlexPod and VCE and specifically Nutanix were doing, right? Because Nutanix at the time didn't have Acropolis and stuff. Nutanix was storage for VMware, pretty much, right? And so okay, well, there it's that storage. This is the hypervisor and the storage, hence hyper-converged infrastructure, right? And everybody liked the term, and everybody just ran with it, and that's cool, right? So it's all good.
Well, here we are now, and it's funny because now we're getting back into this. As IT goes, everything goes in circles, and we're back to now wanting to disaggregate things and take all
Right.
the stuff away and be able to scale things independently. And I suppose even that modality is an interesting opportunity for you guys, and maybe having your base in open source gives you some more flexibility. Talk about that in terms of if you want to adopt new technology, whether it's GPUs or accelerators or this disaggregated notion, how much flexibility do you have? Do you have to wait till there's a project created and enough energy around that? Do you sponsor your own projects in the open source community? Just how does that work?
Yeah, I mean, it's I mean, it's an all of the above kind of answer, right? I mean, there's obviously a lot of stuff in the open source community. We at this point we're big enough. We work with partners that have closed source, type stuff, and obviously we do a lot of our own software development, whether that's proprietary internal stuff or whether it's our contributions back to the open source projects, right? Ultimately, right, it's what open source software development is beyond everything else is it's just hence the name open, right? It's just out there for anyone to contribute to and see and run with and build new projects off of what's already there, right? And so for us, it really solved this problem, like that we had this architecture for the self-healing, and now we could start plugging other things into it. And we've continued to evolve the business accordingly. I mean, 14 years in IT is a long, long time, right? And like I said, we were, literally SATA spinning disks, right, was the original product, and those are long gone, and here we are. But what hasn't changed is the constant evolution of workload shifting from centralized to distributed to centralized to distributed, and you think about the data center and the cloud, which of course is a fancy word that means somebody else's data center, right? Or the edge, which is a fancy word that means not in the data center, right? I mean, ultimately, these are physical locations. You're going to run the applications wherever they make the most sense, and by make the most sense, that means different things to different people. Sometimes it's just what's practical to manage. Sometimes it's because you have technical reasons, and we all like to talk about the technical reasons, the latency and the bandwidth and this kind of thing, and that's a driver. But sometimes it's a lot more basic than that, right? I mean, I see customers who are deploying applications that are 30 plus years old, right? I mean, that application wasn't cloud native, right? That's nowhere near it.
Close, right?
And so, if they didn't make the leap, to the cloud 10 years ago, well, now's probably not the time, right? And so, you see all these sorts of things. So we try to embrace all of that. And, as things have happened, and thankfully, there's, open source is pretty much embraced by everybody now. So, whether it's NVIDIA doing stuff on GPUs and they've got, projects they're sponsoring in open source that allow us to, have, better controls over how those GPUs work or what have you, the networking stacks and everything. I mean, it all works, works really well. I think the thing that open source projects, I'm going to, speak very stereotypically here, but are notorious for is they can be very difficult for the average enterprise to manage, right? Like if you're not a developer, right, these things aren't always for you. And if you think about what Scale started doing back in 2010 and 2011, basically unleashing KVM, clustered-based KVM solutions into, at that time, small and medium business, right? That sounds like a recipe for disaster, right? Like these are guys who, are probably Windows only in terms of their own, backgrounds, would not, have a lot of Linux experience or command line experience. And there we were out with this thing. And so, the management and turning the complexity of that open source stuff into something which is sort of turnkey, easy to use. I mean, that's kind of Scale, right? I mean, that's what we do. And so, we're always out there as these new technologies come out, like I talked about the GPUs and so forth, we may not be the very first ones to get something out there with GPU, because we have to fold that into our overall ease of use, right? And so, we'll go where the customer needs are, of course, but ultimately, when someone uses Scale, I mean, it should sort of just take care of itself, right? And point and click kind of easy. I mean, we've had, I've had guys publish, little YouTube videos of, their 5-year-old daughter deploying, databases on Scale, right? It takes her 30 seconds or something to, to spin that up. Or she has no idea what she's doing, but it's all good, right? But that's the idea, right? And so now, as the world, I no longer have to stand on a soapbox and yell that not everything's going to the cloud, right? There was a period of time where I had to do that, and people would think I was, you probably wouldn't have, but other people would have thought I was nuts, right? Like, no, it's all going to the cloud. Well, now we know it's not, right? And so, edge computing's a thing. And, we joke here that now, right, the one IT guy that lingered around who was good with hardware and was like, disregarded for many years is now cool again, right? The guy who knows that stuff and can deploy it, on-prem. And, an interesting thing is happening now that we see when customers start deploying infrastructure on-prem, maybe it's because of edge computing or what have you, they often find that they have applications that they may have moved to the cloud almost artificially, right? Like there's a movement to take applications to the cloud. I mean, a lot of times, the IT folks that listen to this show will know, some decisions to move stuff to the cloud was driven by like the CFO, right? They just
in the early days, that was almost all of them. There were very
right.
few IT practitioners saying, I trust the cloud, take this stuff, rid me of this gear. Like that. No, like managing this gear and figuring it out was fundamental to their being. So you're right. You get typically a new CFO comes in or a CFO with a new directive to change where the money is counted and how it is spent. And so you go to this OpEx model. I mean, we're seeing some of it now too with the large infrastructure providers wanting to recast how they sell solutions as a service, because now it's OpEx instead of CapEx. And I think the industry has not, I mean, you talk about the zeitgeist of everyone going to the cloud. The current zeitgeist is everyone's going to as a service. But the industry really hasn't thought through that all the way yet, right. I don't think. And they really miss the mark on where you spend a lot of your time in the mid-market or SMB, right? Where there might be some of that, but very few are just going all as a service. That model doesn't necessarily make sense everywhere.
Yeah, well, I think that's a great analogy, because this kind of one size fits all seldom actually happens, right? I mean, and so what we see is, if you imagine, right, I arbitrarily had 100 applications, right? And the CFO said move to the cloud 15 years ago. So, the first things you move to the cloud are the apps that make the most sense there, right? Like email, we don't run Exchange servers anymore, right? Like, thank God, right?
I mean, I've administered some of those. That's the worst.
Oh, right. So okay, email's gone to the cloud. It's never coming back, right? Like that's off it goes, right? And other applications, there's other things that fit very well like that. And then in the middle, you've got applications where maybe it makes sense in the cloud, maybe it would make sense on-prem. You can go either way, but you move that to the cloud. And then maybe these last 20 applications, right, you started effectively forcing into the cloud because there was this fictitious utopia that you were going to get rid of all of your data center and all your on-prem gear forever. Right. And so you started doing that. Well, then all of a sudden edge computing happens. You're deploying things on-prem. And so there's these applications which they're probably more expensive to run in the cloud. Maybe they're more awkward for the users in the cloud, whatever it might be. So we now see those being repatriated, right, back on-prem, not because they're for edge computing, just because, well, I've got the infrastructure, and instead of paying $50,000 a month to run this database in the cloud, I can run it on a server that was $5,000 forever, right? So we see a lot of that, and it makes sense. And I think what's interesting in our kind of deep experience in the mid-market is that, often because of budget reasons or expertise reasons, right, the mid-market lags some of these trends a bit, right? So when quote unquote everything's moving to the cloud, well, that, you may not have had the budget to even entertain that, right? And so But here's the situation, and I'm sure this happens a lot in IT, right? Where that a little bit of a laggard mentality, not because you didn't find the technology interesting, but just from a practical standpoint, you couldn't get there. Well, now turns out you are running stuff on-prem again, right? And that's part of what I think is often overlooked. And again, I credit we have thousands and thousands of customers in these classic mid-market environments. And, the reasons even for edge computing, I mean, I just talked about this a second ago, right? The technical reasons, the low latency and data collection and aggregation, all are real, all really happen, right? This is why people deploy this stuff. On the other hand, right, my reference to the 30-year-old application database or what have you, right? There's a certain kind of blue collar reality of IT when you're out in the trenches, which is, you've got this mix, right? You can imagine, right? You could be a construction company, 1,000-person construction company there in Cincinnati, right? They've got 20 active job sites. They've got trailers in the job sites. They're running some applications there. They've got some crummy internet connection into the trailer, right? They've got modern, they probably have modern Kubernetes containerized app of some kind running in the cloud. That's great. Right next to their, job estimating software, which is, green screen, 40 years old, right? Like, and probably 3 IT guys. Right, like they've got to deal with that mishmash, right? And so, these kind of major, one size fits all movements, seldom work. I wonder what you call it now, right? So there's the word du jour when everything was going to the cloud was all digital transformation, right? Like, so what do you call when you move back out of the cloud? Untransformation?
No, I mean we were just talking about this in a piece last week. I was at HP eDiscover, their annual customer conference, and the tagline was something, I'll butcher it now because I don't remember, but like edge to core to cloud or something like that. And it's like, it was the same thing 6-7 years ago. Like that was it. And now I think it's just making the most of the tools that are available. And maybe cloud in your world isn't all your applications in the cloud, wholesale data center moved to the cloud, but maybe it's some degree of on-prem. Maybe it's an S3 connection to some sort of object layer for backup and recovery. Maybe you're using it for DR, but there's definitely a spectrum. And I think customers are getting smarter at picking out the pieces that are important to them and figuring out, how do I use the cloud where it works? And like you said, the easy apps, fine, send those off and pay a seat license for your email or whatever, because you have to be masochist to want to administer email. But it's not, the wholesale rip and replace with cloud and is not, it's just not happening at a big scale, I don't think. And there are, though, some cases where cloud makes a ton of sense if you've got some new AI ML thing you're working on, and you don't want to stand up a $250,000 infrastructure in your data center because it's expensive. The GPUs are hard to get. Then you have to utilize the GPUs. No one wants to spend 30 grand on a GPU and then not have it run less than 98% of the time, right? So I could go to Amazon, spin up my workload there, learn, and then tear it down without having to make that investment. So there are certainly a lot of point use cases where it makes a ton of sense.
No, that's exactly right, right? And you just put the application wherever it makes the most sense, right? And if there's one thing that, right, the rise of the cloud era did teach us all, right, is that there's a desire to be able to manage your quote unquote infrastructure without, that resulting in you busting out a screwdriver and performing surgery on hardware every other day. Right. Like that's not. And so, when we look at what's different about edge computing now versus, where we just had client server computing before. Right. It's, you're looking for at least some level of abstraction on that hardware. Right. You want the cloud like experience. Right. Oh, I have resources that are going to, my applications will consume. Right. I mean, that's what the cloud is, right? If you can create that pool of resources out of infrastructure, which is running local, without now creating a new nightmarish headache of, managing hardware and all of that. I mean, that's that's really where, scale comes to be, right? I mean, that the whole point of our software stack is to create that abstraction to allow you to have you can think of it a cloud-like experience of managing your infrastructure, but knowing that those apps are running local, right? I mean, there's a company, here in Indiana, not super far from our office, and they're a specialty steel parts manufacturer, one of these a classic SMB company, hundreds of employees, maybe 1,000 employees. I'm not exactly sure, but they have these robotic production cells, right? So they got these. It's super cool, right? These robots, they make steel and iron parts, and they do all kinds of things. And the robots have all these sensors and data, and they can produce massive amounts of data. One robot in that factory can produce so much data that it will saturate the LAN, right? Not much less like send the data to the cloud. Like the local LAN can't handle the data that the robots can generate, right?
Oh my
And
gosh.
so,
Well, the worst part about that is it's probably a bunch of text files too. It's not even like imagery or some bulky files,
no,
right?
yeah, no. I mean, it's crazy, right? And then it gives my blue collar reality when I was talking to the IT director about this particular implementation, because what they ended up doing is they deployed Scale, right, in an edge environment, and they've got these little clusters of Scale similar to what you guys had played with, right? That little, I mean, you got sitting next to
Yeah,
you, right? They have
I
three
got it
little
sitting on the
nodes,
table. Yep.
right? And they put those in each of the robotic production cells, so the robots can just basically create a mini network that's like 6 feet long. The robots dump their data to it. It gets processed or whatever, Johnson Controls or whatever software is running on there, and then only the metadata, what they need, goes outside that mini network, right? So that's cool. And so I was talking to the director, and I'm like, okay, what are you running there? He's like, well, we only have for this, we only have 2 applications running on each of those clusters. One is this Johnson Controls software, which is processing the data, and the other, we've got a Samba server, right? We spun up a Windows instance running the Samba server to dump the data. And I thought, well, I'm like, again, the tech guy in me, I'm like, I could come up with a better solution than probably an old Windows Samba server, right, to hold the data. He's like, well, the robots, not all the robots, but some of the robots, the operating system that controls the robots is Windows CE, which you probably have not heard in 20 years, right?
Classic.
It only supports Samba 1, which isn't even secured, right? He's like, the thing is, there's no upgrade, right? The upgrade is another $10 million
New machine.
robot,
Yeah.
right? And this is that blue collar reality of IT. Like, he's got to deal with Windows CE circa 1994 or something, right? Because
Wow.
it's $10 million upgrade, right? And so so he makes it work, right? And this is what you do, right? And this is the cool part of IT, I think. The engineering part of IT is like, okay, I got parts, I got tech, I got to make it work, right? So,
Well, so the other thing that I think KVM gives you a great base, gives you a lot of flexibility. A lot of your customers probably appreciate the open source nature of what you guys do versus others. Helps you be presumably a little more cost effective, especially in some of the markets that we're talking about, industrial edge, where those guys are still struggling with the data. So you're right. You talk about that cluster to get the data in from the robots, but now I need an application that can do something with that to give me a business outcome of some sort, either higher efficiency or better parts, or knowing when one needs to be thrown away before it goes to the next step, whatever. So like that's what you enable, I think, when you start looking at where's this data coming from, how do I get it in, and then what do I do with it next? So parse the data, get it to your data center, and then run your additional, AI, analytics, whatever on that data to have better outcomes. So that's all cool, and you guys can help on the affordability of some of these solutions, I think. But KVM, how defensible is that? Because I'm trying to think back in the heyday of software defined, so 7-8 years ago, there were dozens of companies, especially in the hybrid storage array era. Like all these guys were coming up. Some of them, Maxta, SpringPath, Nutanix at the time, SimpliVity, like all of these guys. that were coming up trying to solve some of the same problems you were. How how is it that you guys were able to weather that storm on a primarily open source model when at the time and still today most of it is proprietary? Did you have KVM competitors that I just can't recall at first? And then what was different in your mentality that you're still here cranking along and Nutanix went public, but most of the other guys have sold for, did not return money to their investors?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Nutanix has obviously done well, right? But the others that you mentioned, that's almost the graveyard of, the guys that came and went. I mean, the thing is, I think that most of those companies that you mentioned that didn't make it misread what the market was actually looking for, right? Like, so, there's an element, and Nutanix certainly had a first mover advantage. And this was, again, pre HCI being a term, just the idea, you don't need to use a SAN anymore. Like SAN's the old technology. Now you can use, a software defined SAN, right? I mean, that's effectively what they had and have made hay with that. And that's great. Scale was always different, right? Like I have always said, my number one competitor is not Nutanix. My number one competitor is VMware. Right? Because when you go into a data center and you ask the question, what's the operating system? What's the main stuff that you guys run here? Right? Certainly at the time, 98% of people would have said VMware. We run VMware. That's what runs our data center. And my objective was when people would answer that for us is they would say Scale. We run Scale in the data center. That's a different approach. All right, I'm simplifying, but it's a different approach than we're a storage alternative, right? Because if I was, SimpliVity that did, depending on when the investors came in, some did okay and some didn't in that particular deal, right? But in the end, the answer to that question, somebody ran in SimpliVity, the answer was we run VMware, right? And SimpliVity was the storage component of that VMware infrastructure. And what I knew. Right. Again, this kind of, and this is why we had such success with the mid-market, even though, I mean, of course, now we do customers of all sizes, right? But early on, the success in the mid-market is where we saw customers struggling with effectively I don't want to disparage VMware because obviously it's a fine product, but the bloatware that became VMware, right? And this happens a lot, right? So, as a company, as somebody like VMware starts to get more and more, very, global 2,000 Fortune 500 customers, and they build a feature set that goes to those customers. If you're that 1,000-person Cincinnati construction company, right, there's a whole bunch of stuff in there that you don't use, you don't need. And in fact, it may even complicate the pieces that you are looking for, right? And so you had that, and we just wanted to simplify that, right? And so that simplicity was always our thing. And I will freely admit that there was an era of Scale where it really felt like we were swimming upstream with the whole world's going VMware, nobody's ever getting rid of VMware, and I'm out there saying we're a VMware alternative. Right.
Well, yeah, I want to ask you about that specifically because you're right. I mean, if you're a VMware shop, then you're a VMware shop, right? And so for you guys to come in there and say, well, we've got some open source stuff, we've got our own sort of stuff mixed in, and we assure you that the combined thing is really cool and is performant and cost effective and easy to use and whatever else. Man, that's a tough sell into these entrenched accounts. I mean, how were you able to get people that were more open-minded, or was it a cost issue? How did that go?
Yeah, look, I mean, it was a slog for a long time, right? Like you had to find those customers where, the administrative burden that they felt dealing with VMware was enough to open them up to the idea of there being an alternative, right? Okay. And so in the market where we had success there tended to be these more mid-market accounts. And so we became known as the HCI guys for the mid-market. which was
Okay.
fine, right? I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, that. But then, I'd probably 3 years ago, maybe if I'm being generous, 4 years ago, we started to see the change, which was the edge computing thing, right? And so as customers were looking for infrastructure out at the edge, as it turns out, most edge deployments look a lot more like the Cincinnati Construction Company than they look like the Goldman Sachs data center, right? You probably have very few human resources, if any, from an IT standpoint at that location. The reliability of, it's the opposite of a data center, right?
Mm-hmm.
Power, maybe not reliable. Internet, certainly not reliable. Heat, probably a problem, right? I mean, the data centers are hot, noisy, consume a lot of electricity kind of places. You can't have a server that sounds like a jet engine in the back of a coffee shop, right? You have to be able to deal with the fact that, this retailer in the mall has, the whole mall shares a 100 megabit internet connection that goes down 6 times a day, right? Like this is the blue cut. This is the reality, right? And so, those environments need something else. And, and I think this is true in any era that we've seen, like mainframes to client server to data center and now to the edge, is that the incumbent operating system that dominated that prior era is naturally what people are going to try, right? So, IBM had the mainframe, and then Microsoft's main competitor was IBM, right? And VMware's main competitor was Microsoft. And then my main competitor is VMware, because you're going to go out there and say, okay, I'm going to deploy infrastructure at this grocery store, right? And I've got 10 applications. So I'm going to stand up a couple of servers. I'm going to put VMware on it, and I'm going to virtualize and off, and maybe some kind of storage, and off it goes, right? And it'll work, right? Of course it'll work, but then something goes wrong. Inevitably, it's IT. Something goes wrong, and I'm not physically near it. I'm on the phone with the manager of the grocery store trying to get them to push the right button or turn something on, and it's just that operating system was not made for the challenges of the new era, right? There's nothing wrong with the operating system. It's just things have changed. And with edge computing, that change has now sort of opened up the floodgates for us at Scale in terms of people's willingness to look for that operating system alternative, right? And so all of that sort of, swimming upstream that we did to get thousands of customers converted from VMware to Scale when we were still talking mostly data centers. Well, now that's just like, it's not just that Scale has an operating system for the edge. It's that we have tens of thousands of systems out there running it, right? I mean, this is like a known thing at this point. And so it's made a big difference, right? And, it's just very interesting, right? I've seen customers deploy, again, what we would now call edge environments for, long before we had that term. And, one of the catchphrases that I say is that you have to remember the edge is not the data center, right? It's not, does it have servers and storage and networking and apps? Yes, right. But that environment is not the same thing, right? And having a system which is sort of built for that environment and the challenges that it brings is effectively what we're up to. So now it's become much easier, right? And it's the cracks that were in the wall regarding VMware 10 years ago, right, are now much bigger. And obviously you got the Broadcom thing now, and everybody's much more open to this stuff. But
Well, yeah, talk about that, because I was thinking about that too and wanted to go there next. I mean, Broadcom has made it very clear in their business model that they want to do something that you alluded to with VMware, like service our top 2,000, 1,000, 800, whatever the number is, customers, right? And derive tremendous benefit for those users, which is great. The further down you go in organization size or data footprint or whatever, I think it's going to be a little harder when those licenses come up. People are just going to think about it a little more, I think. And that's all you're hoping for, right? Is just think about it a little more and give us a chance to get that wedge in there. And, maybe you're not going to win all the deals, of course, but maybe your percentage goes up a little bit because of the acquisition. What do you think? What's your feeling? I mean, you don't have any inside access to VMware, obviously.
Right.
But what are your customers telling you? What are you hearing? What for the mid market specifically about this new ownership change for VMware?
Well, look, I mean, in some ways, I can say we've been here before from a general IT standpoint. I mean, first and foremost, Broadcom didn't buy VMware to invest in R&D. Like that wasn't. I mean, it's not. I mean, nothing they've said is that's the motivation. It's what you just said, right? They're gonna, Broadcom focuses on customers, and I remember many years ago, I used to use this actually. There was an interview with the then CEO of, I was probably just HP then, because I think it was Meg Whitman, and it was in Fortune magazine, if I remember right, and she had said that, this was sort of this wasn't meant to be a statement someone could use against them, right? But you'll see why I did, right? Made a statement that was something like, I won't get it right, but directionally correct. 80% of their revenue comes from 50 customers, right? Mm-hmm. And so I would use that. I'd say, okay, well, what happens when your customer 14,822, right? Like they don't care, right? And it's not, again, there's nothing wrong with their business. They just can't care, right? It's impossible, right? And so, when you look at this, I'm going to bring this all the way back around to what I was talking about earlier with my dad, right? And IBM. He worked at a construction company. It was a industrial construction company. Went from the mainframes to the AS400. And, the AS400, as I said, was adored by its customers. I mean, they're still in use today in many cases, widely used in these mid-market type accounts. And then what did IBM do with it? They just stopped working on it, right? Like, I mean, they just went away, right? Like, and in comes Microsoft and client server and the whole deal, right? Like, and the PC and Dell and all this, right? So here we are again, right? I mean, if I had to, if history is indicative of the future, right, that the VMware for the mid-market is just going to go away, right? Like, and it'll be there, and you can always, force yourself to use, a tool that wasn't built for you. But that's what really opens things up, and people are rightfully nervous, right? I mean, this is what many people think is going to happen, right? So as people, customers who, maybe look at Scale before and decided, nah, we'll stick with VMware for another cycle, right? Well, when that cycle comes up now, it's like, well, maybe not, right? Mm-hmm. And they have to think, right? I mean, one of the things that'll scare folks is if they haven't, if they don't know Scale, right? If they only know, well, there's VMware and there's Red Hat, right? The learning curve and the idea of like, I'm just going to dive into, again, an open, what's rooted in open source, even if I'm using, enterprise version or whatever, like it's command line and all that. It's not what I'm thinking about. Well, again, Scale's there to make all that easy, right? So you have the ease of use. You can embrace that open source technology and get the benefits from it, but have it all packaged up with the tech support and everything that you need, right? The other part of that I love IBM equation, right? We're right there, and I think that it's been. It makes me, it brings a smile to my face anytime I look, right? Because when I see online reviews of Scale, which there's many at this point, right? One of the things that often gets cited is ease of use as well as tech support, right? How good the tech support is. And, it's more than just saying, oh, we have, I got better training or something for tech support. Like this is also rooted in the product itself. Like if the product's easy for you to manage, it's also easier for my support people to manage. Therefore, we can solve problems much faster and much more efficiently. But then I very intentionally, again, one of my swimming upstream battles I had for many years was that Scale spent a much higher percentage of our revenue on support personnel than my competitors, right? And that was, again, I had this IBM, my dad's words ran through my head, right? I had that in my head, like that's what I need to do, and I'm not going to do that by just outsourcing support in the standard, at that point, circa 2010 sort of way, right? Outsource it overseas or what have you. Now we had, tech support, when 95% of my customers were in North America. 95% of my headcount in for support was in North America, right? And and we now have customers all over the world, but it's intended to have support that gives you that peace of mind, right? When I started the business, and my co-founders and I, when I would explain this to my investors, like, why are you spending? Because this is the kind of thing investors look at, right? Like, oh, you're spending more than your competitors on support. And I said, well, look, these guys are professional investors. They invest in other companies. If you have a company that you've invested in, and that company is a, software as a service, probably, right? Some kind of software company that provides a point solution of some kind, right? If things go wrong, right, with that product, the damage is likely limited to whatever it is that product does, right? So if it's if you had a Salesforce alternative CRM system, right, well, the damage is the CRM system, and that might be super painful, but it's known, right? On the other hand, customers who use Scale, like, we're the entire infrastructure. Like, if things go wrong with us, everything is down, right? Like, the whole shooting match, all applications, the business is non-functional. And so, one way that we could provide some comfort to the customers was having this super high-end support, right? I mean, we still, our support number is answered by a human being within 2 minutes, like 99% of the time, and within 20 seconds, like 90% of the time.
Oh, you'd prefer to have someone answer the phone than have some crappy chatbot that makes your
a
customers
chatbot or the
aggravated.
phone tree. That's the thing, right? It's like, they're already on edge, right? It's like, we've all been there, right?
They're calling you, they're not calling to say hi, everything's working great.
No. Seldom does that. Once in a while, you do get that one, but seldom does that call come in, right? Then something goes wrong, and you want to help them, get going, and that's that's been our approach the whole time, and now we have a reputation for that. So with that reputation, it's a little bit easier. But it was a long time to build it up, right? I mean, I'm here in Indianapolis, I started a company that I decided to take on the biggest incumbents in the industry with a different approach, and that's what's worked for us. So back to your original question, right? That isn't what, when you mentioned those other HCI guys, that's not what they were trying to do at all, right? And so it just became like, well, it becomes a technology battle, right? And so it's like, okay, well, this guy's got HCI and that guy's got HCI, and where do I fit? Like, Scale just feels different, right? Scale feels different to the customer than that. And we have I'm pleased, right? But I always say, we have a customer base that would make Apple jealous, right? Like, I mean, our customers are very, very active in promoting us. We get lots of referrals from customers, and we're as big as we are now. We're still a little bit of an unknown player in many circles, right? I mean, it's not, if I sat 50 people down in the room and presented to them, half the room didn't really know who we were, at least, right, coming in. And so, but I might have, in those 50 people, there might be like 5 customers, right? And then that makes all the difference, because now, I walk out of the room and those customers, talk about their experience with Scale and so forth. And, also we've been able to demonstrate that we've navigated many, many changes in IT, right? Again, 14 years in the business is a lot of changes, and it's not a flash in the pan kind of thing. When I started the company, I would often get the feedback like, okay, well, this all looks great, right? The product looks awesome. I love you guys, but what happens if you get acquired, right? Or you go out of business, whatever. And at the time, right, I used to joke, right? Like, okay, well, when I started Scale, Sun was a company, right? I mean, they got acquired. EMC was a thing, right? Like, these guys, it's not just the little companies that get acquired. And well, now we got VMware. Right? I'm like, well, I guess I outlived them, right?
Twice.
Yeah, so here we go. Right. So, it's, and I understand the fear, right? But I built the business with the intent that we had to build it with this kind of long-term view. And I don't know what the business plans were of all the different guys that you mentioned, but I suspect most of them were not thinking of it that way. Right. Because it's like, well, we could build this and, get acquired and so forth.
Yeah, right. You look at it like that, and I don't know exactly what you guys have done differently, because you do have venture capital in, so they're, there's got to be an incentive to repay investors, right?
Yeah.
Fundamentally. But the other guys, I think, were laser focused on maybe not even IPO so much as acquisition by, because there's a history of it, by Dell, HP, Cisco, IBM, whoever, right? Marvell's
Yep.
buying a lot now because they had points in their portfolio that were missing some sort of coverage, and storage was right to go develop those things. I mean, Dell and EMC combined made so many acquisitions: Extreme IO, Equalogic, Compellent. Dell buying EMC eventually, Data
Yep.
Domain going into EMC. I mean, that's six right there. And the market got spoiled on those activities, and then it kind of stopped, right? Like there were still some big acquisitions, but there were not a lot of them that were of high grade. And when we saw some of these, like even SimpliVity, when HP bought them, it was a relatively low number. It was not something, as we said, that was exciting.
It wasn't what they were
Spring
going for. Yeah.
but they when your model is to run fast and hard, and you're okay to lose money every quarter so long as you can continue to fill that funding funnel, that's fine until it's not. And then
Yep.
you're screwed, right? And so I think when you're talking about what were customers concerned about, I'm sure a lot of them were concerned about, is this a sustainable business? And if they fold, where are we going to be? But you've gotten through, probably, I mean, it's 14 years, some of those uncertain times.
Yep.
And here you sit, and I mean, you're talking a lot about Edge. We've got the little cluster sitting here on these Intel Enterprise Edge devices. These are NUC 11s, I think. It's a unique play. When we set this thing up, you went through your whole service model. We did it all remote. You guys sent us a box. I took the things out, got the power cables. Kevin plugged them in, plugged in networking, and then I think maybe we gave you guys an IP address, and that was it. Like, we didn't do anything. We
Yep.
didn't prep for it. We didn't do anything else. And then got on the phone with one of your white glove guys that walked through, okay, connect here and do this and this and this. And we detailed all the steps. And we actually have a video coming out on YouTube this week. So I'll put that in the description for this for anyone that wants to check that out. But I think we were fully operational in under half an hour. And we did nothing. We prepped nothing other than maybe one IP address. And that was it. And we did it all remote. I mean, it used to be, it was a services contract. And I know this is a little cluster. You guys sell rack scale stuff too.
Yeah.
But it's the same thing, right? It's
The software is identical. The software
Right.
stack's identical. If you
Right.
had a big server with 48 drives in it, it'd be exactly what's on those little boxes. Yeah.
And same thing, same deployment. So this was great. I mean, your guys did really well. And we are always suspicious of it's on a 3.5 by 5-inch note card. You'll be operational in 15 minutes, because it's almost never accurate.
Right.
And it's almost always, as you said at the very beginning, networking. It's almost always networking. But this thing was really easy. The guys were flexible. I think we might have had to reschedule once for something. Like, cool, no problem. And really good communication via email. The other thing that you didn't mention, and I want you to spend a little bit of time on this, you talked about the passion of your customers, but you guys have one of the more active communities that you manage that I've seen. I've seen a lot of it show up for others in like Reddit. How do I do X, Y, or Z? And it'll be like some subreddit, right? With success sometimes not. But
Yep.
you guys have really built this community that I think the very first thing I got was an email with a login to the community before the shipping notification, before anything else, to start to go explore that. Why is that so important to you?
Well, it gets back to this concept of, we're there, we're standing behind it every step of the way, right? Because the reality is, if you're successful at all, right, a community of users will emerge, right? So do you
Okay,
do you let that
default,
just,
yes.
yeah, I mean, you just gonna let that roll on Reddit, right? Or are you gonna take which you can, right? But regardless of where the community exists, are you gonna take an active part, right, in that community? And and we wanted to do that such that my team will sit there and answer tech support questions in the community just like we would if you got online chat or called, right? I mean, we're going to sit there and do that because we want the right answer for one thing, right? And other users will do it. The other thing that and I've just learned over years of being in tech is that you very often find that customers come up with unique. It's not even like problem solving. It's like they come up with unique ways to use your product that you never thought of, right? And so then when somebody posts in a community like that, oh, well, I here's my use case, all of a sudden out of the blue, another customer says, oh, we're using it like this. And it never even dawned to us, right, that would be the case. And then you see, being able to monitor that and see how people are using the product and where the bottlenecks are. Because again, when, it's one thing to have product management, and we do this, of course, product management, call customers and say, okay, what would you like to see changed, right, and so forth. What you miss, though, if that's the only kind of feedback loop that you get, is that there are often things which you might say, oh, this would be really easy for us to change and be more efficient. Doesn't even occur to the customers to ask that, right? Because but once you see them using it a certain way, you're like, oh, we could do, X, Y, and Z. I mean, you talk about how easy that was to set up. And that's been our setup process for many years. And it's a huge advantage when you're talking about edge computing. And if I have to deploy, 150 stores or something, like, having 30 minutes instead of 3 weeks is a big deal, right? On the other hand, man, if you could get that 30 minutes down to 10 minutes, that would be a big deal, right? And so, sort of the goalposts move a little bit. And, the stuff that we're forthcoming is, you'll be able to pre-configure those kind of systems such that all you actually do is turn them on, right? And they'll reach out to the system and sort of install themselves based on how you defined it, right, ahead of time. But you can see it, again, in my phrase, the edge is not the data center. If you think about a typical VMware environment, it's a Monday morning or Tuesday morning, the team meets, something needs to be done that's going to take 2 minutes. Right. Nobody even writes it down. Right. It probably in the meeting, one of the IT folks just takes care of it. Right. Mm-hmm. If I have to perform that 2-minute task 8,000 times across 2,000 sites, like you're putting out an RFP. Right. Like it's a whole different animal. And so, that's where a lot of our focus is now. OK, as customers start to deploy edge environments at a greater scale, no pun intended, like how do we evolve the software to address those use cases? And it doesn't, these don't have to be big enterprise deployments. They can be, right? But, I talk about the little manufacturing company with the robotic production cells, right? They were a long time Scale customer, very classic Scale customer. They have a data center on site, server room on site at the factory. And they've got, the factory floor. Well, when they started doing edge computing, all of a sudden now that one customer has a dozen clusters deployed, right? And needs to manage a dozen clusters without walking around and getting in the way of the robots and all that. And, if you take, if they open up a second factory, now it doubles, right? And that's what we see. So, it's interesting. And I'm glad you had that experience of the setup, because it's, like you said, this is one of those things that, my sales team can say till they're blue in the face, but nobody believes it, right? No one believes it until they actually get their hands on it and try it, right? My favorite party trick at a trade show or whatever is to spin up an application on a cluster like you've got sitting there and like unplug one of them while the app is running, and then watch the app move over to one of the other servers and then plug it back in and move it back, because it's sort of seeing is believing, right? Is, trust but verify kind of a thing. The other thing, and you guys have had hands-on experience, is that, you have in your mind, right, as an IT professional, what a server looks like. And then one of the, these things show up and it doesn't look like a server, right? It looks almost like a toy, right? And I'll do this again. I'll hide it right under the classic like cardboard box, like, or a sheet covering it up, because it's got NVMe drives, it's got good networking. I mean, I can run an app that's pushing 50,000 IOPS on that thing, right? That'll solve that 90% of what customers are going to run would run on that, right? But they never realize, especially when you start clustering or pooling all those resources together, right? It's not just one, it's you got 3 or 5 or 10 or what have you. So, and again, that's always been the case with us, but Edge, the new edge use case kind of resets the playing field in terms of opening the door for somebody like us.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's been fun. We're actually messing around with a little VDI on there now, just to further push, probe at the edges, and see what else they're capable of, and where else it can go. I do think, though, especially for your larger units, you look at VDI. I mean, that might be a perfect workload where the cost to run that on a premium hypervisor and then another license for Horizon or whatever just may not be appropriate, depending on the types of desktops you need to support, especially those that are more ephemeral for call center or whatever, right? Where they don't need GPUs. They're not doing CAD modeling in these things. There may be some more opportunity there. It occurs to me that we spent so much time talking about beer and history lesson and your mentality and a little bit about investing that I don't know that we spent a lot of time on the product itself, which is fine. I'll put links to the paper we did on the little edge solution and the video that we went through, the setup video. It's like 11 minutes. It's a good view for those that want to see how this comes together. That we did. Where else can people go? Check out the website to learn more. Where can we send them?
Yeah, the best place to go is scalecomputing.com, right? And I'd simply say this. I mean, before you renew that VMware license or before you buy that next Dell server, take a look. This stuff is out there, and it's, I think when you see the stuff you guys are putting out there, it's a very, very different feel to managing your infrastructure, right? And it can give you, it can solve a lot of problems. So yeah, scalecomputing.com. We have pricing right on the website. It's another thing I'd like to be transparent about. You can create a quote and look at the price right there. There's live chat if you don't like picking up the phone, or there's 24/7 phone if you like talking. So we got you covered either way.
All right, well, this has been great. I will definitely look you up the next time I'm in Indianapolis. I don't know if the Bengals get up there this year or not. We'll have to see if we've got a football showdown. We can.
All right, we make it work one way or the other.
All right, thanks for checking in. Appreciate it, Jeff.
Very good. Thank you.